What's that?
That sounds ambitious.
It should be. But I'll let you know that we will take just much time in chapter 2 as well, so don't get expectations of anything picking up in terms of speed. I will let you know this. As we started this book, I told you that this book is about the good news from God. That is the theme of Romans. And I keep reminding you of that because as far as we've gone in Romans, you have yet to hear any good news. The first chapter doesn't deal with a lot of good news. As a matter of fact, I'll let you know the good news is not going to kick in until chapter 3 and verse 21. And just to keep you interested, let me read that for you so you realize there is good news in Romans. But here it comes. But now, notice that change? After reading all this bad stuff, Paul says, but now, the righteousness of God has been manifested apart from the law. Although the law and the prophets bear witness to it, the righteousness of God through faith in Jesus Christ for all who believe. That's where we're going. You're not going to get there just yet. So bear with me as we try to get to the good news by going through some very bad news, because this is where Paul starts. The understanding is this. To understand why there is grace and forgiveness, you need to understand sin and guilt. To understand the need for newness of life, you need to understand the death and sin that we are in. Paul says there is a context to this that you need to understand. So let's read this through verses 24 to 32 one last time today to get our context. Therefore, God gave them up to the lust of their hearts, to impurity, to the dishonoring of their bodies among themselves, because they exchanged the truth about God for the lie, and worship and serve the creature, or the creation there, rather than the Creator, who is blessed forever. Amen. For this reason God gave them up to dishonorable passions. For the women exchanged natural relations with those that are contrary to nature. And the men likewise gave up natural relations with women, and were consumed with passion for one another, men committing shameless acts with men, and receiving in themselves the due penalty for their error. And since they did not see it fit to acknowledge God, God gave them up to a debased mind, to do whatever should not be done. They were filled with all manner of unrighteousness, evil, covetousness, malice. They are full of envy, murder, strife, deceit, maliciousness. They are gossips, slanderers, haters of God, insolent, haughty, boastful, inventors of evil, dishonest, disobedient to parents, foolish, faithless, heartless, ruthless. And though they know God's righteous decree to those who practice such things deserve to die, not only do they do them, but they give approval to those who practice them. Negative. Just a little bit negative there. This whole thing has a starting point. What we're dealing with here is God's response in a reality. Now, if you remember, this whole bad section started in verse 18. Looking back at that, remember verse 18? It told us what we were doing here. For I am not ashamed of the gospel, for it is the power of God for salvation. That's 16. Well, let's read 18, be better. For the wrath of God is revealed from heaven against all ungodliness and unrighteousness of men, who by their unrighteousness suppress the truth. Could somebody close that door so we can at least survive from that horn? Don't know what. Now it's done. For a second got up there. That's what I made you do that. It would have gone until it was inconvenient, but here we go. Remember this. This verse says God is continually revealing his wrath against all the unrighteousness and ungodliness of men. God is acting in wrath. And so the question comes up that Paul is anticipating, as everyone is asking this, is God justified, if you will, in judging man? Is it fair? And the fairness comes down to this. If you look out over this world, how many people really know there is a God? And even if they do know there's a God, how do they know what the answer is? What does God want from them? How do you understand the gospel? How can God judge a people that does not know enough to be held accountable? And that's the question we've been seeing and trying to look at here. Now, Paul could have had a simple answer. Because the simple reality is man is fallen. We are born in sin, right? From the first day that we take a breath, it is sin until something changes. Man is a fallen creature. Since the time of Adam and Eve, we have been fallen. We are sinful in our core. And God is justified in judging. And Paul could have just said that. Well, you're sinners, and he's a holy God. You've got it coming. But he doesn't do that. Paul takes a very different tack, and it's interesting what he does here, because he says something that we gave you in a series of words. Remember these words all beginning with R? Of course you don't. That's why we're going to repeat them. You wonder why we review? Because nobody remembers, now do you? Revelation is the beginning point. God started with revelation. Here, you see him? Did it right. He remembered. Revelation. And you're the student everybody hates now. You got the A. You were at your notes, you see? He took notes, folks.
Kevin's not here.
It's ruined now. Revelation. Here's the beginning point. God could have just said, you're in your sin, that's the way it is. But God decided to do something. He said, here I am in my creation. You are lost, you are sin. Every man knows and understands there's something missing in his heart and soul. He recognizes there's something wrong in this world. And God revealed himself, not only his presence, but an aspect of his character, to say to man, here's a solution. And in his creation, God made it plain that this is a God of huge power and majesty. Not a tiny God, not a God that doesn't have the capacity to cope with whatever problems are present. He made it plain this is a God of beauty and understanding and love in the nature, again, of what he has created and put in front of us. God made his presence and his character known, and man's response was what? Rejection. Do you understand what Paul's saying? He's going, do you understand? God, knowing man needed him, made himself available, and man doubled down on his sin. Man looked at that and said, I would rather stay in my sin. And how entrenched was he in that? Because the next word was rationalization. Man said this, I looked into creation, I looked and saw the face of God. I'm not interested. I decided I want to come up with my own philosophy, my own morals, my own understanding of things. In fact, here's what. Instead of effectively saying there is a creator God, I'm going to act like I'm the creator God. I'm going to write the rules. So my rationalization, I'll come up with my own philosophy, my own ideas about life, and I'm going to completely come up with a new understanding of truth. Now that would have been bad enough. We found another R. Anybody want to take a shot at that one? Religion. Religion is not man's highest point, it is man's lowest point. He has looked at the reality of God, he has rationalized a new philosophy and said, instead of letting God be the creator of me, I will be the creator of God. You understand how low that goes on the scale? I'm going to create lesser gods. I'm going to create gods that I can handle and that I'm comfortable with. I'm going to create gods that will confirm my sin and tell me it's just fine what I want to do in life. I'm going to come up with a whole new concept of gods, and I'm going to make a lot of them. There's no end to man's religion because I want to be able to change and pick and choose whenever the mood strikes me. I'll come up with a new version of God anytime I feel like it. Yeah, John?
Well, it's an inversion of the creation, in the sense instead of man being made in God's image, it's God being made
In man's
image
image.
of God.
It is. Absolutely. Completely flipped upside down. And so God now has been placed under man. He is created by man and in control of man. And now, starting in verse 24, what we saw last week is God's response to that rejection. God's response to man's desire to rationalize and come up with his own morals and understanding, and God's response to man's religion. And God said this, we just read it 3 times, if you want to create your own version of morality, if you want to create your own version of God, if you want to come up with your own idea of what's right and what's wrong, tell you what, I'll let you live with that, and let's see how that goes. I'm going to give you over that. I'll give you your last R for today. He gave them to a reprobate mind. Basically, he's saying this, if you want to live with stupid, I'll let you have it. I'll give you stupid. I will let you live that way and let you see what you create. You've decided to be the creator. Let's see how that creation lives out. Let's see what comes out of your idea of morality and reality. Let's see how that works. Now the ESV here says a debased mind. That last part, I went with the R word because I needed another R so we could have all alliterated lines. But a reprobate mind. That same phrase comes up 3 different times in 24, 27, and 28. God gave them up. God will now judge. Now understand the judgment we're talking about. This is a judgment for God. I get asked this all, how close are we to the tribulation? When is God going to start judging the world? Do you think God's going to judge America? We don't turn around. God has been judging us for a long, long time. Understand this. God, by stepping back, by withdrawing much of his care, is allowing man to judge himself. Judgment will get worse. We looked at that last week. God is going to withdraw more of that care as time goes on and let man sink deeper and deeper into his own sin. And why is he doing this?
In hopes to fully turn.
In hopes that man will see and turn. God, understand, if God wanted to, he could just lift all his care out of this world and we destroy ourselves in a heartbeat. But God leaves some restrictions, he leaves some supports, he allows some things to be held in check in hopes that man will see his own foolishness in time. And that is his goal. If you will, God is going to let you create a taste of hell in this life in hopes that you do not have to live in hell for eternity.
Amen. Hallelujah.
That is the grace of God. That is what he's trying to accomplish here. It's an incredible level of grace that he's trying to put into our hearts and minds and change it. And by doing this, he is showing man the foolishness of his own actions and the emptiness of this. There is no mistaking the fact that humanity is unhappy. Have you watched this world at any given time? Watch every protest, watch every group that's demanding change. They are the most miserable and unhappy people ever. And they're always telling you, we're here to change the world for the better. And you're just looking at them thinking, man, I don't know if I really like you being in charge. Because if that's better, I'm not so sure that it's good, something I want.
The singing's pretty good though, isn't it?
What's that?
The singing's pretty good.
Some of the singing, well, no, I've actually heard some of the protest singing. Now, I gotta say that's really gone down. At least in my era, in the 60s, when we had protest music, it was listenable. It was still stupid, but it was listenable.
We had ears pretty good though.
Yeah, evidently we could at least sing. I mean, I'll give us that much. We were as dumb as the generations now, but we could sing. Not now. Now you got me off track. You see, you're happy with yourself. We go to these things. But they're angry. Here's the thing, they're angry with their circumstances. They're outraged by the injustice of the system that they have. And what they do not realize is the system they're unhappy with is what they created for themselves.
Yeah.
Man has created the system he's unhappy with. He has created all of the problems that he has, and he will not recognize his own responsibility for it. Looking at our passage here. In Romans, take a look at verse 24. Therefore God gave them up to the lust of their hearts, to impurity, to dishonoring their bodies among themselves, because they exchanged the truth about God for a lie, and worship and serve the creation rather than the Creator. They came up with their own ideas, and now they're unhappy with the results, but they will not recognize who's responsible for the failure. What's that?
They blame God.
Of course, God's to blame. That's always the interesting part. The answer is always more of the sin. You never stop pursuing, no matter how much worse it makes it, you continue to pursue the sin rather than turn to God. Now notice how it starts here. It's an impurity. They go after this impurity. They give it the lust of their hearts to impurity. The word is the same word, unclean. You remember the lepers would come out and they cry unclean? That's the word. The word's literal definition is a rotting corpse in a grave. Rather picturesque, isn't it? It came to refer to any kind of rot you want to talk about. It could refer to any kind of filth. But commonly, in the Greek, this impurity could be applied to the worst kinds of sexual sin. And that's where the word often was used in the Greek culture. This uncleanness talked about things that anybody would recognize are just too far gone to be justified or understood in any way. So man goes into this impurity and he's not happy in it. Now, what does man do to make himself feel happy then? What's our response in human? What do you see in our culture? How do we find a way out of this to make ourselves believe things are going to be better?
Have a protest?
What's that?
Do a protest?
Well, we can do protests, we can scream at other people, that's a favorite, sure. What else?
Go further in.
Sin.
Always further into sin, and then you have to find some way to justify the sin. Yes.
Yeah, make other people believe in.
There you go. What we really need is everybody else to confirm that my sin really isn't sin, and then we'll all be happier.
Yeah.
Think about how our culture is built.
Misery loves company, right?
Exactly. As long as that company is miserable for the same reason I am.
Exactly.
We can't have this disparity in things.
No, no.
But understand what we go after. We have, if you listen to, in the inner city for years, we've had these things, we have young children chanting this. I am somebody. We have to confirm that what they are. We have all kinds of things. I love this. The biggest thing now is self-esteem, right? We've been talking about that for a while. What is your self-esteem based on? Everything you want. That's right. Self-esteem is based on whatever standard you set yourself. I love how that goes. And now the new term is to affirm. No matter what you want to do, no matter what you want to believe, it is my job not to challenge that, not to go, let's have talk. That doesn't make any sense. My job is to tell you, that is wonderful. You are beautiful for doing that. You are the best you I've ever seen. And this is the attitude we want to have. We have to affirm everything that goes on in the world. But sin, here's the reality, causes a torment that man cannot escape. I've told you this before. Psychologists and psychiatrists have discovered something that's very interesting in humanity. And they will say at the basis of every psychosis, at the basis of every problem, mental illness people have is an uncanny sense of guilt. Man cannot get rid of his sense of guilt. Now, why do you think he can't get rid of that sense of guilt? Because he's guilty. One psychiatrist, I was reading his book, I was stunned by this. He said, I could release 90% of my patients tomorrow if I could convince them they were forgiven. Now this is a secular psychiatrist that's saying this. If I could convince them they were forgiven, we would be able to stop this. I wouldn't need to go on. And this is something I found. I spent, as you told you, a number of years working in an environment that is probably the most anti-Christian environment you can find in a country today, a college. And there's the attitude there that is as anti-Christian as you get. And all these people that are always coming at me and attacking the faith I had, and had brilliant people, a number with genius IQs and so forth, I found out that an overwhelming majority of them were in some kind of counseling. They were all in counseling, and they all talked about how much it was helping them. And I remember talking to them, and most of them had been for years. In fact, some of them had been decades. And I'm thinking, if you've been in this for decades, I'm having a hard time being convinced this is helping anymore. I'm not seeing a curing. One young lady was in our van pool that we traveled back and forth with, worked there in the college. And she had an abusive parenting like I had, and we made friends because she wanted to share. And she goes, "Yeah, I've been in counseling now for 25 years. How's that working out for you?" And I go, "I'm not in any counseling." "Oh, you stopped?" I never started. And she goes, "How do you cope?" I got to share the gospel with her, but in her mind, this didn't make any sense. How do you had to have the psychiatrist tell you why it was that you were having problems and to continue to work with it. And she'd been 25 years in counseling and still could not get past the trauma of that experience. Now, I'm not throwing out counseling. Please do not get me wrong. I'm not saying that there's no value in it if it comes from the right place. But I'm saying the world's answers are not answers. Yeah. And you know what? She's felt guilty again. Her sense was of guilt. It's an amazing thing. For most abused children, they believe they did something wrong to cause it. And they need forgiveness. And It's just amazing what they hang on to. These attitudes that are in them. But the philosophies of religion, man, are not changing his condition. Now, here we get into our passage. It says God gave them up. And there's 3 sections here where he says this, and the first one gives us sort of the essence of this. And as I said, the essence is impurity. Akatharsia in the Greek, and literally translates as a grave or a rotting grave. And notice what it says here in 24, that the source of this, therefore God gave them up to the lust of what? Of their hearts to impurity. So where did the problem come from? From the man. It came from their heart. It came from within them. Again, this whole, follow your heart. As I told you, it's the worst advice ever given. Never follow your heart. Find out what's true, because your heart lies to you. It always will, unless you get it reprogrammed by God. The heart. The source of this pollution is the heart. And a number of places, 1 Thessalonians 4:5 says the unsaved live in their own sensuality and their own lust. James 1:14 tells us that man is tempted to sin when he is drawn away by his own lust. The problem comes from inside. Ephesians 2:3, among whom all who lived in the passion of our flesh, carrying out the desires of the body and the mind, and were by nature children of wrath like the rest of mankind. The body and the mind produce desire for sin. The problem has never been, and this is where the world is at odds with us. The world will say, the problem is it's a corrupt and fallen and I wouldn't say fallen, a corrupt world that corrupts man. And if we could change the environment, the man would get better. The Bible says the environment would get better if you got rid of the man. It has to be changed into something completely different, because all of your problems are self-produced. The culture you have made is of your own making, with your own morals, and you're not happy with it. Do you notice a connection? And they don't. They can't see it there. Therefore, God gave them up to their own lust. That word lust is an interesting, it refers to passion, epithumia in the Greek, and it means a wrong or illicit craving. A wrong or illicit craving, a desire that is obviously bad for you. This is the beginning point. I want you to understand, because Paul's setting up something here. We're going to deal with a very controversial issue today as we get into this text. Paul is saying there is in man a lust for something that's obviously not good for him. Now, think for a minute. Those of you who have had children, have you noticed in a child that if you give him his own choices, he does not generally choose the best option for what is good for him? Ask him what he wants for breakfast. Let's try a simple one. Is he likely to go, well, Dad, what I really need is something healthy. We should probably start with some good fruits, perhaps. We should just limit sugars and be, is that where they go? Ice cream. Okay. There is in the desire something that is obviously bad for him. And that's what he's trying to get out of here. Man wants something bad on a daily basis. And Paul is going to try to give you an understanding of how bad it is. Now here, verse 24, he says, they defiled themselves. Therefore they gave themselves to impurity, dishonoring or defiling their own bodies among themselves. Defile is an interesting, it means to degrade, to insult, to treat shamefully, or to damage. To dishonor is perhaps the closest. The word in Greek for honor is tim. The word Timothy is honoring God. To tim is to honor. The word here is atemas. It is the exact opposite of that. And it says that man by nature chooses things that are dishonoring to his body. Things that are going to be defiling or damaging to his body. They have exchanged something. They have twisted the idea of the truth. So God gives them up. Now, what I'm building toward is this. Paul is now saying, I want you to understand how bad it gets when man sets his own rules. I want to choose an example so extreme that any reasonable person would look at this and go, yeah, that's terrible. That's what he's after here. That's what he's trying to set up. He's going to give an example of how bad man can get left to his own devices. Now I say this because we're coming to an example that has been a real sticking point in the world today for quite some time. And a lot of churches are saying that the interpretation I'm going to give you today is completely out to lunch. It is not what really is in the text. You're overreading it and you're attacking people unnecessarily. And I'm sorry, that's not where the text is going. What have I told you? What is the best way to study the Bible? By context. And the context here is Paul is saying there is something so vile and so disgusting that God gave them up to that shows you how bad man will get. So, verse 24 again, therefore God gave them up to the lust of their hearts, to impurity, the dishonoring of their bodies among themselves, because they exchanged the truth about God for a lie, and worship and serve the creation rather than the Creator. Now, I love this. They decided to believe a lie. Now, here's where it really gets insane. Who told the lie that they believed?
Satan.
They did.
Oh, they did.
Man lies and then believes his own lie.
This is true.
Can you imagine? They declare it true. Is this amazing? I mean, we come in here, I tell this story about my past that is completely and obviously a fabrication. Both of you are going, that guy is lying through his teeth. He never did that. I know he is capable of doing that. And when we get done with the conversation, the only person that believes a lie is me. I go away thinking, that's true now that I think about it. That's where man is. He tells the lies and then believes them. He lies to himself. Now I want you to think about that. Go back to the first sin. Now we say, well, the devil lied to Eve, right? She wasn't the first one to lie. What did God say? And what was Eve's response? He said we should not eat of it or even touch it. Did God say that? Why did Eve interject that?
Create doubt.
It was a justification to create doubt. She immediately goes, why can't I get near that? What is God holding out on me? It was already in her mind, and the devil then tuned into that.
If that's true, what else is true?
She lied to herself.
True.
Entitlement.
There was entitlement. There was a sense of, why is he holding this back? Have you ever noticed that? You put the one thing away, and there's 300 things for a child to play with, and they want the one thing you put away. And there's the nature of it. There's a problem with here. Now notice what he says there. And then they decided to worship the creation rather than the creator. Remember that list of gods we looked at? They were crawling things and creeping things and images of men. So I'm gonna make a god out of creation. And I'll tell you, like I said before, if it isn't that kind of god, we'll make a god out of something else. Environmentalism has become a god.
Yeah.
I have been listening to some environmentalists that literally say they're hoping that that humanity dies out, that we can save creation. Now, of course, they don't call it creation; it's just the world. But how much of a religious fanatic do you have to be to say that the best worship I can have for my God is if all of us die? This is a twisted religious thinking that they have. So he has this issue, and now here Paul gives an example of this. Verse 26. For this reason, God gave them up to dishonorable passions. For their women exchanged natural relations for those that are contrary to nature. Now this one's a little ambiguous, some would say. How do you know it's talking about a lesbian relationship here? Come on, anybody having trouble seeing that in the text? They gave up what was natural. Now I want you to understand, Paul is driving this home because Paul, like us, we have men and women, male and female. Men and women is the more honorable thing when we talk about people. Biological facts, we talk about male and female. Which do you think he uses here? Men and women or male and female in the Greek? Male and female. He's talking about biological reality. Paul is focusing on a biological reality, not a cultural thing, that's not what's involved here. He's saying biologically there's a reality, and he said, here's the thing. And notice he starts with women, and there's a reason Paul does this. And it's not because women are worse, it's because in general, throughout history, women have been less of a problem than men. You can go back through history and as far back as you want to go. In fact, if you read the book of Corinthians, it's interesting because the whole thing going on there, and one of the dynamics is there was a huge uptick in women getting involved in crime, sexual promiscuity, and things that they hadn't seen. And in the Roman culture, they're shocked by it. Now, I want you to think about the Roman culture. Is this a highly moral culture in the world? Not really. But things had gotten so bad, and it was bad because women were doing it. That's what was shocking to them. They're not generally shocked when men. But when women start to do that, and here's a reality. If you go back through time, for as long as we've been keeping records in this country, on average, men have been 4 times, or at least 3 times, even more recently as in the 80s and 90s, 3 times more likely to be involved in homosexuality and other kinds of sexual perversions. 3 to 4 times as likely. Now they just took a recent survey that is rather shocking, at least it was to me, and they found this, that currently among all people, women are now twice as likely to identify on the LGBTQ scale as men. As a matter of fact, if you look at women, young girls, and so forth that were born between 1997 and 2012, 28.5% identify on the LGBTQ scale, while only 10% of men. For the first time, probably in human history, more women are showing approval for and participation in the most perverse kind of sexual sin than men. Now that is a stunning reversal, because I want you to understand this has happened in just a few short decades. That we have reversed a trend that has been there for just about the entirety of human history. This is a massive change. It was common because women, because of marriage and childbirth, that they resisted these kind of things because they did not want it infecting their families or their children. And today, the number one group that is more for transgender care, that we call it, is women, mothers of their own children. That's the most common one that wants this. Yeah.
The other side of that, those we demasculize men.
Okay, we can get there, and we will, but I'm just saying, we have changed the dynamic. For the first time in history, in a culture, more women do not have, or I should say, most women, most young women now do not put family or having children, marriage or children, as a priority in their life. A majority of our young girls do not see that as a priority in life.
That's also a Western thing.
It is a Western thing. I'm now talking about our culture. I am talking about our culture. The change is dramatic. Notice what he says here. For this reason, God gave them up to dishonorable passions, for their women exchanged natural relations for those that are contrary to nature. Okay, you can say, well, he doesn't specifically say it, but he doesn't even. And the men likewise gave up natural relations with women and were consumed with passions for one another. Okay, I think we're pretty clear on this one of what we're talking about. They are consumed with passion. Now he now gets to this where it comes to the men. Do you see a difference in how he describes the men's involvement in this and the women? Anybody see a distinct change? Consumed with passion, or to burn in the King James. There's a difference here. And Paul is saying this: yes, it is much more common for men by and large through history for a simple reason. Men are more passionately driven in the sexual realm than women are. There is a burning in them for this. There is a shamefulness in this for them that is beyond what we normally see. And I think you can see that difference if you look at what goes on. Even in our transgender communities, it is always intriguing to me that when women want to pretend to be men, they tend to try to look like fairly conservative and normal men. Men who want to be women, have you noticed how they tend to go? To the absolute absurd extremes of it. Men, the Let's talk about the drag queens for just a minute. And you notice it is the most hypersexualized, the most absurdly over-the-top image of a woman they can possibly portray. It is hugely sexual, which gives you an idea that these people then feel they have the need to do story hours and things with children. Your need in life is to dress as a woman in the most highly sexually way you can and then parade it in front of children. That is the perversity we're talking about. This is a desire, and Paul is saying that it is completely consumed with this. It is beyond and over the charts. I don't want to beat this thing to death, and I don't want to get too involved in this, but it is intriguing to me. As we look at this, when you look at the number of sexual partners a sexually active homosexual man as compared to a heterosexual man, and we're not talking about a Christian man, but it is not uncommon for a homosexual man to have relations with over 100 other men in a year. Some have recorded as high as 200 and 300. But it is not uncommon for it to be over 100 other sexual partners in a year. They are much more involved in this. They are much more involved in the most savage and brutal kinds of sexual conduct. It is this burning there is in it. Notice what it says. They've received in themselves a due penalty for their error. What is Paul saying? He's saying they are paying a physical cost in their body for this. Now, do we have any evidence that just Paul was right about that? That kind of activity, there's a price to pay for that?
Yes.
Now, we can talk about that, but here's a simple fact, and it's something that you're not seeing science do much anymore. It used to be pretty commonly, there were studies you could find on this, and that's disappearing because they don't want to find the results that are there. But the life expectancy of the average homosexual man is reduced by nearly 1/3. 1/3. Now, they have made inroads into that because we've got drugs now to control AIDS and control a lot of the diseases and things, but it's not just the diseases. We're talking about the level of physical activity and the kinds of things they do in their sexual practice is devastating to a body. It is destructive. And that's just if we're talking about a heterosexual man who may be sexually active and a homosexual. If you talk about a man who is in a married relationship, they have the longest life expectancy of all men, period. And again, it's not close. There is a huge difference in it. And I used to always get jokes at work when we talk about this, and I bring these things up and I go, here's the studies you guys have done, and here's the results, and they go, well, married men don't live longer, it just feels longer. Supposedly that's their joke, see, because it's such a terrible relationship. No, there's a difference. There's a massive difference.
Now, historically, especially in the Old Testament, isn't it kind of like a mandate you're supposed to kill them?
In the Old Testament, it was a death penalty.
When did that go away? I'm dead serious, because Christ come and said he's not going to change one jot or tittle of the law.
Okay, you want to get into that right now?
Well, I like hanging around my muzzle for, you men. They don't have those problems in the countries they're from. They take care of it. They can't believe what they see.
They replace it with some other problems that we have to see. I really don't think that the best answer of showing a sane society is to take and hang a homosexual from a crane in the middle of the city and watch the body rot. I do think that may not be a biblical approach to the problem.
It fixes the problem.
Okay, so I'm just saying, you want me to take that path, I'm not going with you just yet to go down there. I'm going to finish my outline.
Okay. Go ahead.
But we are, in the New Testament, trying to change the hearts and minds of people. But we'll come down to that. If you'd like, we can have a chat afterwards. He says God gave them up. He says this reprobate mind, this change. I want you to understand how bad it's gotten. A number of cities across the U.S. have established classes that are taxpayer paid. And these classes were created because of the number of deaths and serious injuries that they were having to treat in the trauma wards and so forth that were related to the sexual practices of these people. It was so bad that the cities have set up classes to teach them how to do it without hurting or killing each other. That's the burning we're talking about, that they had to establish courses in this kind of stuff and pay for it with your tax dollars to teach these people not to kill each other when they do these things. That's the level we're talking to of this burning and this passion that is out of control. I find it amazing how hard we are working at covering that up. Now I'll ask you, you run into this in movies and TVs, and now there always has to be the gay couple, the transgender couple, and it is always the smartest, kindest, and wisest person in the show. That is not reality. They want to reshape it and make it sound normal. There is a reason they would not settle for civil unions. It had to be marriage, because marriage speaks to normalcy. Yes?
You're noticing it too in like middle school series of books.
Yeah.
They start slipping into character.
Always.
Or even younger, it's just, and it's a good series, you're enjoying it, and then you get, and it might be a side character, it might be a main character, and you go, wait a minute. Because we wanna make it normal for our children.
We have to normalize it as much as we can. But the simple reality is not that it's normal. You want to talk about the divorce rates among gay marriages, and as bad as it is in heterosexual, it is vastly worse in those relationships, vastly worse. The amount of sexual abuse, physical abuse, mental abuse, violence that you can talk about towards children, the level is vastly worse in those relationships than it is. And that is not to say the heterosexual couples do not do some of the most heinous things imaginable. But I'm saying the level of how often it happens is way worse. It is not the same thing. There is a problem here. And Paul is saying, I want to give you the most undeniable example possible. I want you to see how bad it can get. He is not being subtle. Any clergy person that wants to come along and claim, well, the Bible doesn't really outright. You can't read this passage any other way. There is no way to pretend it doesn't say this here. There's no way to calm this down. There's no way for us to try to soft pedal it to make people feel less under pressure, more accepted. I'm sorry, he is calling it unnatural. He is calling it twisted. He is calling it perverse. You can't read it any other way. And like I said, I don't want to beat this to death, but I wanted you to understand it is not subtle in Scripture. And then he goes into this, starting down here now, verse 28. And since they did not see fit to acknowledge God, he goes back to where we started. Remember this whole thing in verse 18? They wouldn't acknowledge God. Verse 19, they saw God and said, I'm not interested. So he goes right back to says, because they didn't see fit to acknowledge God. That's all they had to do as a starting point. God could have moved them in a completely different direction if they would have started right there. That's where God could have brought more light and led them to truth. They wouldn't do it, but God gave them up to a debased mind, there's a reprobate mind, to do what ought not to be done. And therefore, they were filled with all manner of unrighteousness and evil. That's his broad head category. Evil, every kind of evil imaginable now starts to work out. And you start to see how they do this. It says malice, maliciousness is kind of a general sense of doing evil. Malice is a desire to harm others. Envy, it says, wanting what someone else has. There is murder and strife. They are violent when they don't get their way. Deceit, they will lie about it. They are gossips and slanders. When there isn't physical violence, it's violence of words. They hate God because he exposes what they are. They are insolent, haughty, and boastful, so they go about their sin with a swaggering sense of pride. And have you noticed how widely that word is used to describe sin now? It is pride. We have to be proud of it. And they work at inventing new ways to sin. Now that's the burn aspect of it. And if you understand this, it is like a drug. And any officer that's dealt with a drug user and so forth, any medical professional, what is the problem with a drug? You always have to have more. You always have to have more to have the same effect. And so they have to come up with new ways, new types of sin. They have one that seems almost out of place there. They are disrespectful to parents. And you kind of go, how did that sneak in there? Why does that fit all this dystopian view of evil and sin in the world? Because what is the one thing you have to tear down more than anything else if you want evil to run wild?
Next
The
generation.
family. You've got to destroy the family. They are disrespectful. For sin to have that, you have to destroy the family. Every movement you will see out there, from Marxism to feminism to trans rights, attempts to tear down the family. We're just seeing battles right now with school boards and school teachers that will literally say there are our children. In fact, for some say we have them more than the parents do. There are more our kids than they are theirs. They literally believe this. It's an astounding reality. And Paul sums up with a list: foolish, faithless, heartless, and ruthless. So they are devoid of wisdom, values, concern, or kindness. It's just not there. There's no sense of treating people with anything in terms of respect. And these stands it when he starts it. They know enough about what is right to realize they are wrong. Is it something there that somehow he says, though they know God's righteous decrees, to those who practice such things deserve to die? How can man possibly, living like this, know what's right? It sounds like he's saying they only understand what is wrong. How does that match together?
He gave them
It
over.
goes back to that guilt thing you were talking about earlier.
Now try this one. Isn't it amazing that despite the fact we want to do all of these things, we have laws against most of them? Every time man wants to get his society under some level of control, he realizes this much, and here's where the inconsistency is. He wants to commit it, but the problem is when everyone else wants to commit it too, there's this clash. I don't mind treating everybody else in the world like this, but when they do that to me, when they lie to me, when they treat me deceitfully, when they're malicious toward me, now I have a problem. And so man, amazingly, every time he comes back to laws, returns to whose laws when he wants to control a society? God's. He always comes back to that, as if somehow or other he innately knows this is the only thing that really makes sense. And that's his reality here. They know God's righteous decrees. To those who practice such things deserve to die. Not only do they do them, but they give approval to those who practice them. There's the last one. They make heroes out of the people who come up with new sins and new ways to sin. We make superstars out of this. We love to make heroes out of the people who find the cheapest and obvious, most plentiful ways to sin. This is our culture. If that has stopped, we can go ahead and stop, or did you not start?